Welcome back to another episode of the BioHub. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Adrian Rawcliffe, CEO of Adaptimmune. With over 20 years of experience in the pharma and biotech industries, Adrian has led pivotal roles at GSK and now spearheads the development of breakthrough T-cell therapies at Adaptimmune, tackling some of the toughest challenges in cancer and beyond. We're excited to dive into Adrian's journey, the advancements of Adaptimmune, and what the future holds for T-cell therapies. Welcome to the show, Adrian. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Great to be here.
Good. Let's just get straight into it. So just to start off at, what attracted you to Adaptimmune after your time at GSK? And also, how was the transition to leading the company?
Yeah, so I'd spent 17 years at GSK when I joined Adaptimmune, and apart from a few years at Price Waterhouse, that was my career at GSK, and frankly, it had been an amazing ride, amazing journey, and I'd had the opportunity to do amazing roles on business development and the venture capital side, CFO in North America business, a load of other really interesting, fascinating roles in the UK and in the US as well. So, I think nothing but fond things about my time at GSK. However, the role of Adaptimmune came up at a sort of interesting time at GSK, because GSK at the time had made a decision to do quite a large strategic transaction with Novartis, and as part of that, they were divesting their oncology business. Now, they kept some early stage discovery, including actually a collaboration with Adaptimmune, but they largely divested their oncology business. And a few years beforehand, a couple of years beforehand, they got out of neurodegeneration, and that was that to me. That was a sort of really interesting set of strategic choices, and I completely understand why they did that. Neurodegeneration at the time was a really difficult area, and the strategic benefits to GSK of the move to bulk up in both consumer healthcare and in vaccines and divest the oncology also made a lot of sense to them strategically. But it did mean that the company I worked for had just got out of two of the major therapy areas that I feel are really important, and particularly in sort of who is paying for the research that pharma companies do. Well, it's largely the Western Hemisphere. You go out onto the streets anywhere in Europe or the United States, and you say, what are you worried about? Probably it's cancer or it's Alzheimer's or some other form of neurodegeneration. And so having got out of that was sort of like just made me question long term the purpose of the company that I was then working for, and quite senior, despite my understanding of why they did it, which is perfectly rational. And at the same time, Adaptimmune came along, and Adaptimmune presented at that point a sort of unique opportunity for me, because here was a platform that was still relatively high risk. They'd just gone into the clinic with their first product in sarcoma, but it was a platform that, if it worked, completely changed the world. And this was what was sort of intriguing to me at the time. That yes, all these things are risky to a greater or lesser extent, but what's the upside if it actually comes to fruition? And there's lots of companies that I could see, and I'd seen when I was doing BD, that were single product companies or had it could transform patient experience in a particular space. They one drug, but it seemed to me that if Adaptimmune was successful, then it doesn't just transform a particular patient experience or have one drug. It transforms how we as a species think about our relationship with cancer and how we treat cancer. And the opportunity there was just sort of too exciting to turn down. And I was able to get in, serendipitously, just before the IPO of the company, And it was also a discussion that, I could have gone, given the roles that I'd done previously, I could have gone into being a CEO of a biotech company straight away. This was a number two role so it was a choice between a number two role in what I thought was an absolutely fantastic, amazing company versus a number one role in a smaller company. And so I picked the number two role in a great company with good leadership and good mentorship versus the alternative in a space that, if it works, changes the world.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the timings as well, with everything that was happening with GSK, like it was at a time when cell therapy was, so interesting to the world, and you had
Yes.
other companies being super successful in it as well. So I can see how it was super attractive.
Yes. And particularly, sort of like, then you think about the dynamic between the CAR T space, where a lot of those companies existed, the Junos of this world, which, it's great. And CAR T have completely transformed hem-onc, a number of the B-cell malignancies in the hem-onc space. But it was fairly clear at that point in time, I think, well, it still is clear, that if you want to actually get into solid tumors, then you've got to have a platform that can target things that are completely specific to the cancer. And the problem with CAR T targeting is very few of the targets are specific in the solid tumor space. Like the heme malignancy space, where they're sort of lineage antigens, B cell lineage antigens. You get rid of your B cells, you can cure your B cell malignancy. That approach doesn't work as well, and so identifying, it seemed, at the time, identifying those targets that are absolutely specific to cancer. It seemed there's a much higher probability of doing that with a TCR based platform like Adaptimmune had than with a CAR T platform.
Yeah, I think let's just go down that route a bit. So cell therapy it's obviously still evolving and fast. How do you see the field changing, and also what role does Adaptimmune play in the future of cell therapy?
Yeah, I think cell therapy is still pretty much in its infancy. So I think the starting point is sort of, is a definitional point, and what's the reason to believe in the therapy. So for me, cell therapy is a form of gene therapy, essentially, for most of the engineered cell therapies. It's a form of gene therapy. And therefore it has some of the attractions, should have some of the attractions that you can have with gene therapy, in particular, essentially permanent gain of function. So unlike a small molecule drug or a biopharm, which requires repeated dosing, and most of them actually work by inhibition. The gene therapy space and the cell therapy space is a sort of differentiated subset of that. I think operate by being able to give gain of function, and in our case specifically, the ability to recognize, primarily the ability to recognize a tumor. I think the piece that is then sort of differentiated for cell therapy versus at least the current frontier of gene therapy is that the drug at the end of the day with cell therapy is a very complex beast. You're giving cells, and we define them as like CD19 CAR T cells or MAGE-A4 targeting TCR cells, but the reality is that those cells are doing 150,000 other things at the same time as they're targeting the cancer, and the 150,000 other things turn out to be very important as to whether that cell is ultimately effective or not. And the ability to modulate those cells ex vivo enables you to do things that you can't do in vivo. So obviously you've got the genetic editing, and you could say there's an argument that from a genetic perspective you could genetically edit in vivo through a gene therapy approach. I think the ability to do that in a controlled environment, potentially do sequential edits or multiple edits, and be very clear that you've managed to get those edits to take in the cells that you're then giving as a product, is somewhat differentiating cell therapy. But more importantly is then the ability to take those cells and stimulate them through the manufacturing process in order to end up with a very specific product that is then augmented and able to do what it needs to do inside the body when you put it back in. And so the ability to genetically edit and to adapt to the product through the manufacturing process, I think, means that you end up with this gain of function, in some cases we believe permanent gain of function, medicine that's also augmented with all of this other capability that you can't get with any other form of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that as the value proposition, and the objective, just in our space would be, okay, every cancer has an effective engineered cell therapy against it. Then if that's the summit of Everest, the question is, where are we at the moment? And one of the things I've said in the past is, the debate is whether we've actually reached base camp in the ascent of Everest yet, or whether we're still waiting at Heathrow to get a plane out to Nepal. We're certainly no further advanced than that. So we're very much in the infancy of this. We've got the first products out there. We've actually got the first blockbuster products out there. So if you think about the comparison of cell therapy to monoclonal antibodies, which is a comparison that I think carries a lot of water, actually. We're probably in about 1997. Maybe 2000. You've had the launch of the first blockbuster, Rituxan, Herceptin.
Yeah.
In that case, in our case, it's the CD19 CAR Ts and maybe now the BCMA CAR Ts. But you are very, very far away from the dominance of the top-selling pharma products that monoclonal antibodies ultimately came to represent. And you just look at where Humira was, and so I think we're still 10 to 20 years away from really seeing what cell therapies can do. And key to that is going to be actually the entry into the solid tumor space, because the hemonc space is about 10% of the total burden of cancer. 90% of it's in the solid tumor space.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more challenging problem, much more difficult problem, and it's one that we think Adaptimmune's platform is really quite well suited to start to address. But the big shift is going to be, as we get these products onto the market, what we're going to understand is how the factors other than the genetic editing really play into the efficacy of the products. Why, for example, in our product, we have most of the patients see a reduction in their tumor, but some don't. We have no idea why that is the case. We obviously have some theories and we've got some translational data and we can hypothesize, but actually we don't really know why. And we don't really know why a decent subset of our patients have incredibly long durable responses going on for years and others don't. But we can understand that, and there's a function of both the tumor and the cell. And that understanding, I think, will drive iterative performance enhancements in cellular therapy at a pace that's much faster than for other modalities. You can iterate over a period of a few years as opposed to a 10+ year cycle, and improve that product such that that ambition of a highly effective product against all cancer, a large swathe of cancer, is realizable over that sort of 20+ year vision.
Yeah. No, I mean, the one thing I always get from when I talk about cell therapy is like the accessibility of it as well, and how, as a business as well, it coincides to get investment for something if you're looking to bring the price down or whatever that is. I always think that's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you think about this in the long term, there's an evolution from autologous cell therapies into much more efficient autologous cell therapies. I think there's a sort of engineering cycle to get that to be more efficient. That enables pricing in a different place to where it is currently. It also, I think, if you can improve the efficacy in an iterative fashion, you
Hmm.
also have the opportunity to start thinking, okay, well, yeah, what is a curative medicine worth in this space? And that starts to be a real hypothesis as opposed to something that's largely hypothetical at the moment. Certainly in the solid tumor space, although I think in the hemonc space it's starting to get there. And then over time, I think there's other approaches like the allogeneic approach, or even being able to do this cell therapy manipulation in vivo in some long term way. The only thing that I think's borne out by the last decade is that wonderful thing about the US biotech ecosystem is that there's a willingness to invest in platforms that hold great promise, like allogeneic cell therapies. The idea of an off-the-shelf cell therapy and solve all of this distribution issue that you have with the autologous platforms. Uh, and there's a lot of investment in those. And we have an allogeneic platform in our research organization that's reasonably advanced for an engineered TCR T cell platform. And but the problem is that all of those platforms have taken an awful lot longer and been subject to much more technical challenge than was envisaged when they were first hypothesized and invested in. And the reality from we believe is that the next 10 to 15 years is likely autologous. And therefore, if you want to get these therapies available to people, you have to
Hmm.
solve the challenges of an autologous model, as opposed to thinking that those challenges are going to be solved by some magical new technology that's going to come along and just dispense with all this, because it probably won't. And therefore, do the hard work of solving the engineering challenges. And they are largely engineering and logistics challenges of solving those problems, in order that the benefits of these therapies, which are profound, can be made available to people, as opposed to waiting for the next big thing that's going to solve our problems.
Yeah, definitely. That you're not the only successful company in this space. So how do you ensure that Adaptimmune remains agile and successful in such a competitive environment?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's really that is a big challenge for cell therapy companies. I think it's a challenge for um, for the pharma model as a whole, because if you think about operating in a highly regulated environment, and you just take Tecelra, that we've recently had approved for the treatment of advanced synovial sarcoma, in a particular subset of patients. That that was a therapy that was developed on a manufacturing platform that was probably one of our earliest manufacturing platform iterations once we brought the process in house. But the way that the regulation works on this, you have to have treated the patients with a particular cell product made in a particular way and done that consistently throughout the pivotal trial, in order to then be able to demonstrate to the FDA that you can not only benefit patients, but you can also make the product. Which means by default that manufacturing process is, at least 5+ years behind what is currently state of the art, and therefore you've constantly got this dichotomy as a product oriented cell therapy company between the development of the products that requires you have a depth of expertise and a real ability to demonstrate the manufacturing prowess and your control of that environment on an established product. But at the same time, that product, that manufacturing process, is not really the state of the art. It's not the state of the art from a cost perspective, and it's not the state of the art from a scientific perspective. And because so much of the value of the product, so much of the benefit of the product comes from the manufacturing process. You said before, we think of these as, we talk about these as what they target, but actually how they're made probably defines as much, if not more, of the efficacy and the risk benefit for those patients. Because of that, actually, the ability to manipulate the manufacturing process is a really important driving force behind the efficacy of the product. So this isn't a sort of like a hypothetical, well, how could I make this a bit more efficiently? This is actually defining to the benefit that you can bring to the patient, defining to the product as a whole. And so you've got to maintain this sort of like almost two faces on this, while at the same time you've got to be very good and very disciplined and very in control on the stuff that you are taking to market. But you can never allow yourself to be complacent and think that that is the be all and end all, and you've got to constantly be trying to iterate. And iteration in this space means introducing those manufacturing changes into the clinic, and constantly trying to get the best possible version of the product in your early stage trials. And that's challenging. The other reason it's challenging is that there's a lot of innovation in this space, and companies like Adaptimmune need to think of themselves as much as integrators of that as we do as originators of it. So whilst we've got a platform, which, and this is another dichotomy, we come from a very innovative place. We like our TCR platform. We think it's a huge competitive advantage. However, it's not going to be all of the solution to all of the problems that we face as a cell therapy development company. And so we've got to be open to and actively seeking to integrate those technologies that can be additive to what we're doing, and produce incrementally and sometimes transformationally better products. And then the last piece of the innovation spectrum is, there's occasionally, very occasionally, stuff that would come along and eat your lunch. And it's very easy as a company that is based off a technology platform with a manufacturing platform with a bunch of capabilities to get sort of quite blinkered and sort of say, well, we know what we do and we do this well, and so let's do this, and that's where all the value lies. And then suddenly something comes along and this is very disruptive. So, and I think the disruptive technologies, which I think of, there's really two in our space in the last decade. One is the allogeneic platforms versus autologous, and then the next one is in vivo delivery of the genes necessary to deliver T cells, engineered T cells, and those are the two very big disruptive approaches, and there's variations on both of those themes. Most of the rest of it is technology add-ons to be integrated as opposed to truly disruptive technologies. But you've got to pay attention to the truly disruptive stuff and work out whether you're going to have a make or buy strategy for those things, and at what time do you want to get into them.
I see, that's always interesting, isn't it? When you're looking at these companies coming through and thinking, that's the business side of it as well, I suppose. It's like, well, why don't we just bring that on board? And I suppose, how often are you looking at your own pipeline and going, well, we'd love to add to that anyway?
Yeah. So I think we do look at that. I think one of the challenges of being in the leadership position that we are in let's just define that. I think there's a space in cell therapy that is engineered cell therapies for solid tumors. CAR Ts, obviously different heme malignancies, different addressable with a CAR T platform. There's also TILs, companies like Iovance who have TIL products, non-engineered T cells for melanoma and potentially other cancers as well. But in the engineered cell therapy space for solid tumors, that is there are some CAR T approaches, but the vast majority of those are the ones that have traction at the moment are TCR driven approaches, and we're definitely in the lead on those, which means that if you look at our pipeline, and I think about bringing in products against new targets, well, we've got products in our pipeline against the main targets that have been identified and validated so far. In fact, we've been the ones doing a lot of the validation, and so we are looking very much at the front end. And if new targets come out, we're very interested in those, and we don't think that we need to own that, or we need to have developed that. We merged a little while ago last year with a company called TCR Squared, and we picked up a platform that's slightly different to our TCR engineering platform, and that gave us a program against a target called CD70, which is a cell surface protein in both hem/onc and in solid tumor space as well. So we are active, and we're looking, and most of the stuff that's out there, and we're also paying attention to that disruptive space where there are people who have disruptive approaches, and will there come a time when actual acquiring those or bringing those in, licensing or otherwise would be attractive. For example, one of the directions of travel is likely to be to have multi-targeting approaches. So rather than target one target multiple targets. There's a couple of companies that are out there pursuing that space. If that comes to fruition and proves to be valuable, then I think there's a opportunity there to pursue that ourselves a little bit, but also an opportunity then to augment what we're doing with other people's approaches.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I always think like those parts of the business. How often are you looking at those? Like every day, or like I'm guessing you have a team on it.
Yeah. So the way that it normally works is, we're very aware of the competitive space that we operate in,
Right.
and this I'm sort of I'm a bit old school in true competitive space, if I'm honest. And what I mean by that is, our real competition is, okay, I've just launched Tecelra in synovial sarcoma. So I'm interested in what's the competition in sarcoma, and synovial sarcoma in particular. And the opportunity there is there really isn't that much at the moment, and so it's a it's a space where I think we've got a real opportunity, because there aren't that many competitive products. But I sort of view, okay, if you think about where's fundamental value created? Well, fundamental value is created by treating patients, and therefore fundamental competition is in the competition for those patients. But at the same time, we operate in a sort of cell therapy space that is evolving the field of cell therapy, and so there's a different set of competition, which isn't actually the primary competition for patients, but it's the longer term secondary competition for ideas, for talent, for capital. And so we're very aware of the companies that are in our space there, and pay particular attention to their, when they're at conferences and their releasing of data, constantly modifying how we think about the world based on that. So as a really good current example, we have a program called a program targeting a target called PRAME, which is a cancer testis antigen. It's associated. It's in a wide range of cancers, like squamous non-small cell lung cancer, melanoma, a number of the gynecological cancers, etc. So very broadly expressed target. Very interesting, and quite a hot target actually at the moment. And just a couple of weeks ago, Avetix put out data from their melanoma trial in the same target, that showed that they had a really nice response rate and a really nice duration of response. And I think that sort of made us that increases the validation around that target. And we think we have a better mousetrap, because our our programs more specific. So we're targeting a best-in-class sort of approach. There's only two cell therapies really in that space, us and Adaptimmune. So it's not particularly crowded, but that validates that as a target and makes us feel more confident and more positive about the investment going forward in that space. There's other spaces where data comes out and it sort of makes us feel less confident in a particular approach. But it's so we pay a lot of attention to the competitive data sets that are coming out. The other thing that I think we pay a lot of attention to is the incremental technology improvements. Now, it's a slightly different approach because most of those companies are they want to partner with a company like Adaptimmune, so they come along and they know they might believe they have something that is fundamentally changes the way the world works, but most of the time they realize we've got a bolt-on, we've got a way of producing a particular cytokine which, if you put into your T cells, helps sustain the T cell proliferation or persistence or penetration into the tumor, whatever. So those sort of bolt-on technologies we probably see, and there's like genetic ones and then there's manufacturing ones. We probably see one or two a week, and there's a lot of them, and so picking the ones that would really make a difference to us is sort of key.
Yeah, I think that's all super interesting. The way, and also the fact that you look at your competitors and them having good data is ultimately good news for you is a strange dynamic. Look,
I think so. I mean,
sorry,
I think it's a rising tide lifts all boats at the moment. I mean, honestly, and because the real competition isn't here.
That's so true.
It's in the product. So I think it's perfectly okay to say, and there's plenty of space for more than one PRAME product. I mean, how many CD19 products are in development? And tens of CD19 products in development. And so the idea that there could be two different products against probably the largest solid tumor cancer testis antigen target doesn't fill me with surprise.
And ultimately, you look and you talk about competitors, but everyone's aiming for the same goal, and the bigger picture is cancer, etc. So it's all good news anyway. And look, I'm going to completely change the topic now. To more, I suppose, on the mindset side. So I want to talk about culture, and how you specifically approach culture and building a strong culture at Adaptimmune, and then how and what values are most important to you and at Adaptimmune.
Yeah. So I think like every other company, we have a sort of set of cultural values, but more important than the cultural values is I sort of view the culture as how we behave towards one another, as we seek to conduct our business, and there's a set of stuff that you need to have if you're engaged in this business. You and there's a peculiar resilience required to undertake this activity over the long term, to be in a leadership position, because in essence being in a leadership position means that the vast majority of people aren't going to agree with you. And so you've got to be in a position where you're doing stuff because you firmly believe in it. You need to make sure you're doing the right things, but at the same time, most of the other people are doing something different, and there's good reasons for them doing something different, and they feel that they can challenge what you're doing. And so there's a real need for resilience across the organization, and down in the organization. And what that really translates into in the way that a company operates is how we behave towards each other, and it requires, actually, in my opinion, a quite sophisticated set of skills, of leadership skills, and a high level of emotional intelligence, high levels of confidence, a perspective that everybody across the organization has for the direction of travel. So real alignment on the direction of travel, and then a an approach to each other that is built off respect, and also a level of sophistication, how to have tough conversations, how to disagree agreeably, how to focus on answering the question, not attacking the person. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time focusing on is that level of trust, building the level of trust around our senior leadership group, building the level of trust both in intent and in competence, all with a view towards being aligned on what we want to achieve. And if you're aligned on what you want to achieve, then there's a whole load of stuff that can be done. You're aligned on what you achieve and you trust each other, then actually a whole load of stuff follows from that. So those are the primary things. And there's a phrase that my CFO has used, which I find really important. We have a low tolerance for people, what I would say, behaving badly. Now, clearly it happens in an organization, but there's no reason to shout at people. There's no reason to get aggressive at people. You've got to solve problems in a more sophisticated fashion. And the phrase that we've used frequently is, if you think about an organization, it is better to have a hole than an a-hole in that role. And the lack of tolerance of people who are
on the wall somewhere,
who are not effective team players, and that doesn't mean that we don't disagree. We disagree vigorously, and it's inherent in a scientific organization that you can have robust debate about what the best route forward is. But that, if you want to do that properly long term, then you need people who can do that in a way that is only disruptive when it needs to be. That isn't unnecessarily disruptive, because they don't have the skills to manage the relationships to get stuff done.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We have a similar value at Avetix. Obviously, we're much smaller and quite a different kind of company, but it's this idea of meritocracy, which is
Yes.
I suppose it's very Steve Jobs-esque, isn't it? Where we almost took it from, where it's like decisions are made from the best ideas, not despite what hierarchy is. Which I absolutely love, because the way I see it is, how naive can you be as a leader in the business to think that you are the best guy to make the decision on every different situation? You just can't be. So the best people for each situation are put in the room, and they make a decision between themselves, and that's how we do things.
The Jobs quote of I don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. I hire smart people to tell me what to do.
Exactly.
I think that absolutely spot on. There's an element as well, which is delegation. You want the decision made at the lowest possible level. Now, that doesn't mean that the decision's always made right at the bottom of the organization, because the lowest possible level might be quite high. But the more you can empower an organization with an enterprise vision, so that the people can actually make those trade-off decisions for themselves with an understanding of what the knock-on impact is, the easier you're going to find, the better decisions you're going to make, and the easier you're going to find it.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to talk about the milestones you guys have got coming up as well. You've obviously hit quite a few recently, which has been awesome. But what's coming up?
So we've just hit probably maybe the biggest milestone in the history of the company, with the approval of Tecelra, which is culmination of, we've been around for 16 years. I mean, that product's been in development for the better part of 10, although it hasn't been in the clinic for that long. And so, that's a huge milestone. And what we're now doing is we're executing on the launch of that. So I think there's going to be a number of our sort of, catalytic milestones that are going to be related to the launch and getting the sales of Tecelra going. Tecelra is the first product in what we believe is a really nice sarcoma franchise. We've got a second product coming behind. It's completed its pivotal trial. The data set for that pivotal trial. We intend to read out at CTOS this year, which is the Connective Tissue Oncology Society. It's the conference for sarcoma, and we've got good history of having a significant data presence there, and that data set should be out at CTOS. That's the pivotal data set that we'll then use to file that product. Intend to have the BLA initiated next year and approval in 2026. And the two of those products between them are this sarcoma franchise. They're able to get to it's about 1,000 patients, addressable patients in the US. It's not large populations, but it's a real business for us, and the starting point for the rest of the pipeline. So I think it's the sales of Tecelra and then data sets from Leticel at CTOS that are the short-term drivers over the next few months.
Incredible. Yeah. And then last question from me, I suppose just a quick one because we've run over a little bit, but who cares? What advice would you give to young professionals entering biotech, especially those interested in cell and gene therapy?
So I think it's difficult because I think the world's changed since I joined GSK. I personally still feel that there is a lot of value in part of the route that I took. I'm not sure that you need to stay at GSK for 17 years, but there is a real advantage to working in a large company. The resources available to you, the opportunities to do different things are really significant. And so whilst I love being in a small company, I realize that I'm a lot more effective in my current role because of the experience that I've had in a much larger company. So that would be my starting point. And then the second thing that I would say is I think it's that I've always benefited from joining places, including Adaptimmune, where my primary reason for joining was that I felt that I could learn, and I feel that yes, there's a whole load of stuff around pursuing roles, title, progression, and things like that. But I've always benefited from picking roles, opportunities where the primary interest to me is that's really exciting. I don't actually know everything in that space. I have the opportunity to learn, and I think there are some really good people there that I can learn from, and that's important to me throughout what I did, and it has been important here. And I think it's particularly true because back to the question we had at the beginning, this space is going to change so much, and it's such a diverse and intellectually fascinating piece of the industry, and there's just an awful lot to learn individually and as an industry before we get to the summit of Everest.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, and I suppose I always think that as well when recruiting. Having people with the mindset you just spoke about, that growth mindset, is so important. You'd be surprised at how common complacency is in terms of them thinking, "Well, I've learned everything now." Especially in this industry, it's almost strange. So I couldn't agree with you more.
It's just really important, and I think if I look around, the people that I admire the most have always put themselves in positions where there was the circle of the larger the circle of light, the larger the circumference of darkness. You want to be in that space where it's constantly expanding and there's constant new innovation and new stuff to learn.
Yeah, Definitely. What a great place to finish it. So thank you so much for coming on. And everyone, please like and subscribe to the BioHub. And yeah, absolute pleasure, Ad.
Likewise. Thanks, Max. Take care.
So how